It wasn't just a report released in Washington this week. It was a loaded gun placed on the table. The United States Senate has officially marked Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest president in the world, as a target. They accuse him of crimes, they demand accountability, and the diplomatic language is barely hiding the threat of regime change. But almost immediately, a chilling voice came from Moscow. Russia didn't just object. They drew a line in the sand, warning that any move against Burkina Faso would trigger a catastrophe that the West isn't ready for. But you have to ask yourself the question that the mainstream media refuses to touch. Why? Why is the most powerful military alliance in human history so terrified of one 36-year-old man in a red beret? Is it really because they care about human rights in the Sahel? Or is it because Ibrahim Traoré holds the key to something much bigger? The end of the French colonial franc, the expulsion of Western corporations, and a shift that could ultimately crash the US dollar and wipe out the value of your pension fund. This is no longer just a political disagreement. This is a spiritual battle for the soul of a continent. For every black man and woman watching from London to New York to Atlanta, you feel it in your gut. You are seeing a leader who refuses to bow down, standing exactly where our ancestors prayed someone would stand. But the vultures are circling. In this video, we are going to expose the real reason the Senate is panicking, the secret Russian warning that has the Pentagon freezing, and what this means for your wallet. But first, if you believe that Africa's time has finally come, please like this video so the algorithm cannot hide the truth. And right now, go to the comments and simply type Amen. Let's cover this young leader in prayer and show the world that he does not stand alone. Let's get into it. You have to understand what is actually written in this document because the devil is always in the details. The report circulating in the halls of the U.S. Senate isn't just a collection of observations, it is an indictment. It accuses Captain Traoré's government of orchestrating mass detentions. It claims his soldiers are involved in extrajudicial killings. It paints a picture of a rogue military junta that has lost its moral compass, turning its guns on its own people while inviting Russian mercenaries to do the dirty work. The language is precise, legalistic, and designed for one purpose: to build a case for intervention. When you read it, you can almost hear the gears of the Western war machine starting to turn. They are using the same playbook they used in Libya, the same words they used in Iraq. They create a villain so that when they eventually strike, the world will applaud. But let's be honest with each other for a minute. Is Ibrahim Traoré really being targeted because the United States Senate suddenly woke up and decided they care deeply about the lives of villagers in Burkina Faso? If that were true, where were these reports when French troops were stationed there for decades, failing to stop the terrorists? Where was the outrage when Western-backed leaders were looting the country's gold while children starved? The silence back then was deafening. But now, suddenly, when a young man stands up and says, "We will handle our own security," the Senate is deeply concerned. The real crime of Ibrahim Traoré is not human rights violations. If it were, half the leaders the U.S. supports in the Middle East would be on that list. No. His crime is far more dangerous to the establishment. His crime is audacity. The audacity to look a French ambassador in the eye and tell him to pack his bags. The audacity to tell the American military that their presence is no longer required. The audacity to say that the resources of Burkina Faso, the gold, the land, the dignity of its people belong to Burkina Faso, not to Paris, not to Washington, and certainly not to the multinational corporations that have drained the continent dry for a century. This is what terrifies them. It's not violence, it's sovereignty. Real, unfiltered, and unapologetic sovereignty. When Traoré kicked out the French media, they called it censorship. We call it reclaiming the narrative. When he bought weapons from Russia because the West refused to sell them to him, they called it destabilization. We call it survival. You see, for the first time in generations, an African leader isn't asking for permission. He isn't flying to the White House to kiss the ring. He isn't begging for loans that enslave his grandchildren. He is simply acting like the president of a free country. And in the eyes of the old world order, that is the unforgivable sin. Think about the message this sends. If a poor, landlocked nation like Burkina Faso can stand up to the combined pressure of the West and survive, what happens next? What happens when the Congo realizes it doesn't need Western approval to sell its cobalt? What happens when Niger realizes its uranium is worth more than the aid packages they receive? The domino effect is what keeps policymakers in Washington awake at night. They aren't afraid of Traore the man. They are afraid of Traore the example. They are terrified that you, watching this right now, will start to believe that resistance is actually possible. So they draft their reports. They sharpen their pens. They prepare the sanctions. They try to isolate him, to make him look like a monster, to cut off the financial lifelines of his country. They want to make an example of him, to show every other African leader that if you dare to step out of line, if you dare to touch the colonial structure, you will be crushed. It is a punishment beating, plain and simple. They want to break him before he becomes a legend. But they made a miscalculation. They assumed that Burkina Faso was alone. They assumed that when the pressure got too high, Traore would fold. But they didn't look north. They didn't account for the fact that this time, the bear has entered the chat. And Russia isn't just watching from the sidelines anymore. When the Senate report dropped, most diplomatic observers expected silence from the East. They expected Moscow to be too busy with its own war in Ukraine to care about a landlocked country in West Africa. But they were wrong. The response from Russia was immediate, sharp, and calculated. It wasn't a polite diplomatic note, it was a warning shot across the bow. The Russian Foreign Ministry looked at the accusations coming from Washington and called them exactly what they were, a tool of neo-colonial pressure. Meant they didn't just defend Ibrahim Traoré, they attacked the very premise of the American argument. They said, effectively, you are using human rights as a cover for regime change, and we see you. This is where the game changes completely. For 60 years, when the West wanted an African leader gone, they simply removed him. They cut the aid, they funded the rebels, or in the darkest cases, they sent the assassins. There was no one to call for help. There was no alternative power strong enough to say no. But now there is. Russia has drawn a red line around the Sahel. By publicly backing Traoré against the U.S. Senate's narrative, Vladimir Putin is signaling that Burkina Faso is no longer just a former French colony, it is a strategic partner of the Russian Federation. And that changes the military calculus for everyone involved. After you have to look at the reality on the ground, not just the speeches. The Africa Corps, the rebranded state-integrated evolution of the Wagner Group, is already there. We have seen the transport planes landing in Ouagadougou. We have seen the instructors. We have seen the equipment that the French refused to sell now being unloaded by Burkina Faso soldiers. This isn't just symbolic support, it is steel and fire. It means that if the West decides to escalate, if they decide to push for a military intervention through their proxies in ECOWAS, they aren't just fighting a small African army anymore. They are risking a direct confrontation with nuclear-armed Russian interests. Let's be real about what this means. Does Russia do this out of the goodness of its heart? Is Putin a charity worker? Of course not. Or Russia is playing a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess. They know that the Sahel is the soft underbelly of Europe. They know that if they control the resources and the security architecture of West Africa, they have a chokehold on the French economy and a leverage point against the United States. They are using Africa as a second front against the West. But here is the uncomfortable truth that makes Washington furious. Ibrahim Traoré knows this, and he doesn't care. Why should he? When your house is burning down and someone hands you a bucket of water, you don't ask them about their political ideology. You take the water. For decades, the West offered lectures on democracy while the terrorists advanced. Russia offered guns and asked for nothing but loyalty. It is a transactional relationship, yes. It is dangerous, absolutely. But for a leader like Traoré, who wakes up every morning knowing there is a target on his back, Russia is the only shield he has left. This partnership has terrified the Pentagon more than any terrorist group ever could. Terrorists give the U.S. a reason to stay, A rival superpower gives the U.S. a reason to leave. The Senate report is a desperate attempt to claw back moral authority, to paint Russia as the villain and the U.S. as the savior. But the optics are failing. The people of Burkina Faso see Russian flags as symbols of resistance, not occupation. They see a counterbalance. For the first time, the bully on the playground has realized the small kid has a big brother standing behind him. And this alliance brings us to the most critical point of all. The military support is just the tip of the iceberg. The real threat, the one that could actually collapse the Western economic system, isn't about guns. It's about gold. It's about money. Russia isn't just sending soldiers. They are proposing a new economic reality. They are whispering in Traoré's ear about breaking the chains of the financial system entirely. And if that happens, if the resources of the Sahel are decoupled from the Western banking system, the consequences for the US dollar and for your retirement savings will be catastrophic. That is the real war, and it is just beginning. Now, I need you to listen very carefully because this is the part of the story that the mainstream media will never, ever explain to you. They will tell you about coups, they will tell you about terrorists, they will show you pictures of soldiers and trucks, but they will never show you the spreadsheet. They won't talk about the math, because if you understood the math, you would understand why the United States Senate is truly terrified of Ibrahim Traoré. It's not about democracy. It's not about human rights. It's about the durability of the US dollar and the safety of your pension fund. Let's shatter a myth right now. You have been told your whole life that Burkina Faso is a poor country. You see the dusty roads, the poverty, the struggle, and you think, these people have nothing. That is a lie. Burkina Faso is not poor. Burkina Faso is a nation that has been systematically looted. It sits on some of the largest gold reserves in West Africa. It has zinc, manganese, limestone, and vast agricultural potential. The ground beneath Traoré's feet is paved with billions of dollars of wealth. So why are the people poor? Because for 60 years, that wealth didn't stay in Ouagadougou. It was flown out tax-free to vaults in Paris, London, and Zurich. Here is the scam. Western mining companies would come in, sign a contract that gave Burkina Faso a pathetic 10% royalty and take 90% of the gold. They would use the CFA franc, a currency controlled by the French treasury, to ensure that Burkina Faso couldn't even control its own monetary policy. It was a perfect system of extraction. The West got cheap resources to back their high-tech industries and stabilize their banks, and Burkina Faso got aid packages that barely covered the interest on their debt. It was modern-day slavery with a corporate logo. But then came the captain. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just kick out the soldiers. He looked at the mining contracts. He looked at the gold mines operated by Canadian, French, and British firms, and he asked a simple question. Why is my country starving while our gold makes your stock market go up? And he didn't just ask. He acted. He revised the mining code. He demanded that a portion of the gold be refined inside Burkina Faso. He started talking about nationalizing strategic assets. And then he did something that sent a shiver down the spine of the entire Western financial system. He joined hands with Mali and Niger to form the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, and they began discussing a new currency, a currency not backed by the euro, a currency backed by their own gold. Do you understand what that means? The global dominance of the US dollar and the euro relies on one thing: demand. You, the world, need dollars to buy oil. See, you need dollars to buy gold. You need dollars to trade. This artificial demand allows the United States to print trillions of dollars out of thin air, run massive deficits, and still keep inflation relatively under control because the rest of the world absorbs our paper money. We export our inflation to places like Africa. We live beyond our means because they live below theirs. But what happens if the global South stops taking the paper? What happens if the Sahel, followed by the BRICS nations, decides they will only sell their gold, their uranium, their oil, and their lithium in their own gold-backed currency? Suddenly, nobody needs the dollar to do business in Africa. Suddenly, all those trillions of dollars floating around the world have nowhere to go. They come flooding back home to the United States. And when they come home, they bring hyperinflation with them. This is where it hits you. This is why you should care about a Senate report on a guy in a red beret. If the dollar loses its status as the reserve currency of the resource-rich world, the cost of living in America doesn't just go up, it explodes. We are talking about $15 for a gallon of gas. We are talking about a loaf of bread costing $10. We are talking about your 401k and your pension fund, which are heavily invested in the very multinational corporations that are currently looting Africa. If those companies lose their cheap access to African gold and uranium, their stock prices crash. If the dollar collapses, your savings, the money you worked 40 years to accumulate, evaporates in value. The comfortable retirement you were promised is based on a geopolitical arrangement where the West wins and Africa loses. That is the harsh, ugly truth. The stability of the Western economy is built on the instability of the African one. Ibrahim Traoré is threatening to flip the table. By pivoting to Russia, he is finding a partner who is already sanctioned, a partner who has already been kicked out of the Western financial system and survived. Putin is showing him the blueprint. Look, Moscow says, we survived their sanctions. We are trading in rubles and yuan and gold. You can do it too. If Traoré succeeds, if he proves that an African nation can walk away from the Western banking system and thrive, it is over. The psychological hold of the dollar is broken. The floodgates open. The U.S. Senate knows this. They aren't worried about democracy in Ouagadougou. They are worried about the precedent. They are terrified that if Burkina Faso succeeds, Nigeria will follow, then Ghana, then South Africa. If the entire continent decides to keep its wealth, the American standard of living drops overnight. The panic in Washington is palpable. They see a 36-year-old captain undoing a century of financial architecture. And that is why the rhetoric is escalating. That is why they call him a dictator. That is why they accuse him of human rights abuses. They need a moral justification to intervene because they cannot say the truth. They cannot say, we need to remove him because he won't give us his gold for free anymore. That sounds like piracy. So they say, he is a threat to stability. But whose stability? Yours? Or the stability of the banks that own the politicians? Think about the gas in your car. Think about the smartphone in your hand, powered by cobalt and lithium. Think about the gold ring on your finger. The prices of these things are kept artificially low because men like Traoré were supposed to stay quiet. They were supposed to take the bribes and suppress their people. But he broke the script. And now, the global economic machine is grinding gears. Russia is pouring fuel on the fire, encouraging this economic rebellion because it weakens their greatest rival. We are witnessing the beginning of a financial world war. It is being fought in the mines of the Sahel, but the casualties will be the savings accounts of the American middle class. The dollar is the weapon, and Traoré is the man trying to disarm it. And as long as he stands, the value of the paper in your wallet is at risk, not because of him, but because our own leaders built a house of cards on the backs of the poor, and now the wind is changing direction. But let's pause for a moment and look at the messenger. The United States Senate is deeply concerned about democracy in Burkina Faso. They are losing sleep over human rights abuses in the Sahel. Really? Is this the same Senate that approves billions of dollars in military aid to countries that haven't held a free election in decades? Is this the same body that shakes hands with monarchs who chop up journalists in embassies? The hypocrisy is so thick you could cut it with a knife. It is breathtaking to watch Western diplomats lecture Ibrahim Traoré on the sanctity of life while their own bombs are falling on innocent civilians in other parts of the world. When a U.S. ally bombs a hospital, it's a tragic mistake. When a U.S. ally imprisons thousands without trial, it's necessary for national security. But when a young African captain detains people suspected of working with terrorists to destroy his country, suddenly it is a crime against humanity. The double standard isn't just annoying, it is a weapon. It is used to delegitimize anyone who refuses to follow orders. We have seen this movie before. We know exactly how it ends because the script hasn't changed in 60 years. They did it to Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. They called him a communist, a dangerous radical, a threat to stability. And they demonized him in the press until the world looked away, and then they had him murdered. His body dissolved in acid, his tooth kept as a grisly trophy in Belgium. They did it to Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. They did it to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, turning the most prosperous nation in Africa into an open slave market. And most painfully of all, they did it to the man whose spirit Ibrahim Traoré carries today, Thomas Sankara. In the 1980s, Sankara stood exactly where Traoré stands now. He renamed the country Burkina Faso, the land of upright men. He vaccinated millions of children in weeks. He planted millions of trees to stop the desert. He told the French, "We will not pay your colonial debt." And for that sin, for the sin of making his people proud and self-sufficient, he was betrayed and gunned down by his own best friend. And with the quiet approval of Paris and Washington, they killed the man, but they couldn't kill the idea. And now, 40 years later, that idea has been reborn in a 36-year-old captain who wears a beret just like Sankara did. When Traoré speaks, the youth of Africa don't hear a dictator. They hear a resurrection. They see a second chance to get it right, and the West sees a ghost they thought they had buried. That is why the attacks on him are so personal. That is why the sanctions are so swift. They are terrified that this time they won't be able to kill the dream. The United States Senate report is not a legal document. It is a hit piece. It is designed to isolate Traoré so that history can repeat itself. They want him alone. They want him weak. They want him to fail so they can point at the chaos and say, "See, Africans cannot govern themselves without us." It is the ultimate form of gaslighting. They break your legs and then blame you for limping. But the world is waking up. The global South is watching. They see the selective outrage. They see that human rights is just a stick the West uses to beat its enemies while it feeds its friends. And this time, the hypocrisy isn't working. Instead of shame, it is fueling rage. Instead of surrender, it is fueling resistance. The more they attack Traoré with their reports and their sanctions, the more they turn him into a martyr before he is even dead. They are creating the very thing they fear most, a symbol that cannot be destroyed. To understand why millions of people are willing to die for this young captain, you have to leave the air-conditioned offices of the UN and go to the dusty streets of Ouagadougou. You have to talk to someone like Uncle Musa. Musa is 68 years old. He remembers the days of Thomas Sankara. He remembers the hope that filled the air in the 1980s. And he remembers the crushing despair when Sankara was murdered. For 30 years, Musa watched his country slide into darkness. He watched as French convoys drove past his village, their armored vehicles kicking up dust, while his neighbors were slaughtered by terrorists just a few miles away. He saw the foreign NGOs come with their clipboards and their pity, but nothing ever changed. The schools remained closed, the hospitals had no medicine, the gold kept leaving, and the poverty kept staying. So when the Western media calls Ibrahim Traoré a junta leader or a dictator, Musa doesn't see it that way. He sees a son who finally picked up a gun to defend his mother. I want you to imagine the choice these people face. It is not a choice between democracy and dictatorship, as the CNN headlines tell you. That is a luxury for people who have electricity 24 hours a day. For the people of the Sahel, the choice is between dying on your knees or dying on your feet. There is a saying spreading across West Africa right now. Slaves who cannot defend their own rebellion do not deserve to be pitied. It sounds harsh, but it is the mentality of survival. When Traoré says, "Homeland or death," it is not just a slogan. It is a literal description of reality. The people know that the road ahead is hard. They know that sanctions will hurt. They know that the price of bread might go up because the West is punishing them. But talk to the young students at the University of Ouagadougou, and they will tell you, we would rather eat rocks in freedom than eat bread in chains. This is the spirit that the U.S. Senate report cannot quantify. You cannot sanction dignity. You cannot blockade hope. And this story isn't just happening in Africa. It is happening in the hearts of the diaspora too. I'm talking to you, the taxi driver in New York, the nurse in London, the engineer in Atlanta. You left home because there were no opportunities. You send money back every month to support your families. You know the pain of seeing your rich continent treated like a beggar. When you see Ibrahim Traoré standing on top of an armored vehicle, saluting his people, something in you wakes up, doesn't it? You realize that he is fighting the fight that your father wanted to fight. He is taking the blows for all of us. The West is banking on the idea that Africans are tired, that if they apply enough pressure, the people will turn on Traoré just to get the aid money flowing again. But they are wrong. The pain of the past 60 years has created a callous. The people are tough. They have survived worse than sanctions. They have survived betrayal. So when Washington demands Traoré's arrest, they aren't just insulting a president. They are insulting Uncle Musa. They are insulting the memory of every villager who died while French troops did nothing. They are insulting you. And that is why this movement is dangerous. It's not just political, it's personal. So where do we go from here? The chessboard is set. The pieces are moving. We are standing at a fork in the road, and the next few months will determine the fate of an entire continent for the next 50 years. There are really only two ways this story ends, and neither of them is simple. The first scenario is the one the U.S. Senate report is quietly advocating for. It is the scenario where the pressure works. The sanctions bite too hard. The economy collapses. A group of disgruntled officers, bribed by Western intelligence agencies, storms the presidential palace in the middle of the night. Traoré is removed, perhaps killed, perhaps exiled. The Western media will cheer. They will call it a return to constitutional order. They will promise aid packages and elections. But look closely at what happens the day after the cheers stop. If Traoré falls, the alliance of Sahel States dissolves. The dream of a common currency dies. The French return to their bases. But the people, the millions of young men and women who have tasted dignity for the first time, will not go back to sleep. They will burn the cities down. You will not see stability. You will see Libya 2.0. You will see a civil war that makes the current conflict look like a playground fight. The jihadists, currently being fought tooth and nail by a motivated army, will exploit the vacuum. They will sweep down from the north, not just taking Burkina Faso, but spilling over into Ghana, into Ivory Coast, into the coastal nations that the West considers safe. The fall of Ibrahim Traoré would not bring peace. It would unleash hell. It would create a refugee crisis that would flood Europe with millions of desperate people. It would turn West Africa into a permanent war zone, managed by foreign contractors and looted by corporations while the people starve. That is the price of Western stability. It is the stability of a graveyard. But there is another scenario, a scenario that the establishment is terrified to even whisper about. Imagine if he survives. Imagine if the Russian shield holds. Imagine if the people of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger tighten their belts and refuse to break. What happens then? We see the birth of a new geopolitical bloc. The alliance of Sahel States solidifies not just as a military pact, but as an economic federation. They introduce a new currency backed by their own gold reserves. They kick out the CFA franc, dealing a death blow to the French treasury. They start refining their own oil in Niger and their own gold in Burkina Faso. Suddenly, the wealth stays home. Schools are built with gold money, not aid money. Hospitals are staffed. The roads are paved. If this happens, the domino effect will be unstoppable. The youth in Nigeria, in Cameroon, in Senegal will look at their own leaders and ask, why are we still poor when they are succeeding? The unrest will spread, not as chaos, but as a revolution of consciousness. The puppet regimes propped up by the West will crumble one by one, replaced by leaders who demand the Traoré model. For the global economy, this is the earthquake, a resource-rich, unified Africa. Trading on its own terms means the end of cheap raw materials for the West. It means inflation in Europe and America that no central bank can fix. It means the end of the neo-colonial free lunch. The dollar collapse we talked about earlier isn't just a theory in this scenario. It becomes a mathematical certainty. The world order shifts. The global south rises not as a beggar, but as a partner. This is why the fight is so vicious. The West isn't fighting a man. They are fighting a precedent. They cannot afford to let Traore win because his victory proves that their system is obsolete. They are throwing everything they have at him. Propaganda, sanctions, threats, reports, because they know that if he stands, they fall. We are watching a game of chicken between a superpower and a soldier. One of them has nuclear weapons and the world's reserve currency. The other has the hearts of his people and nothing left to lose. And as history has shown us, from Vietnam to Afghanistan, the man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous enemy of all. But here is the final, terrifying question that no one in Washington wants to answer. What if Traore is just the beginning? What if by trying to crush him, they have already sparked a fire that cannot be put out? What if the consequences Russia warned about are already in motion, waiting for the West to make one wrong move? So, we return to the question we asked at the very beginning. Why is the most powerful legislative body in the world, the United States Senate, terrified of a 36-year-old captain in Burkina Faso? Why are they issuing reports that read like declarations of war? Why are they risking a direct confrontation with Russia over a strip of land in the Sahel? The answer is simple, and it is terrifying. They are afraid because Ibrahim Traoré is proving that the impossible is possible. He is proving that an African nation can stand up, look the West in the eye, and say, "We will not be your slaves anymore." He is proving that the resources of the continent belong to the people, not to foreign corporations. He is proving that sovereignty is not a gift you ask for, it is a right you take. And if he succeeds, the entire house of cards comes crashing down. The cheap gold, the cheap uranium, the dominance of the dollar, the comfort of the Western lifestyle built on African poverty, it all ends. That is the threat. That is the danger. And that is why they will stop at nothing to remove him. But here is the truth they don't want you to know. They can write their reports. They can impose their sanctions. They can send their threats. But they cannot kill a spirit that has already awakened. They killed Lumumba, but the Congo still fights. They killed Sankara, but Burkina Faso remembers. And today, millions of people around the world, in Africa, in the diaspora, in the streets of Paris and New York, are waking up. This fight is not just about geopolitics. It is spiritual. It is a battle between greed and dignity. It is a battle for the soul of humanity. And in this battle, you have to choose a side. You cannot be neutral on a moving train. You either stand with the oppressors who want to keep Africa on its knees, or you stand with the young captains who are trying to lift it up. So, I am asking you to do something right now. Not for the algorithm, but for the spirit. If you believe in the future of a free Africa, if you believe that Ibrahim Traoré deserves protection as he walks through the valley of the shadow of death, I want you to go to the comment section right now and type one word, Amen. Type it as a prayer. Type it as a declaration. Type it to show the world that we are watching and we are united. Let the algorithm see thousands of amens and know that this video, this message, and this leader are covered by something stronger than politics. Share this video with someone who needs to know the truth. Wake them up, because the revolution is not being televised, it is being lived. And the dollar might collapse, the empires might shake, but the spirit of the upright men will never die. May God bless Burkina Faso. May God protect Ibrahim Traoré, and may Africa finally be free. I'm out.